Are you a good person? Are you kinder or smarter than average? Or are you just fooling yourself? Welcome to Word for the Week, Season 2, Episode 39. Today we discuss the slippery issue of self-deception. Christianity is centered on the quest for truth, but is self-deception a widespread problem among Christians, and if so, at what cost? So sit back, be honest with yourself, and join us as we discuss self-deception.
Kathy, my first question is, was that really a good intro, or are we deceiving ourselves?
Well, maybe we better take a look at the facts on self-deception before we decide.
Okay, honestly, that's a good idea. So let's start with this question. What exactly is self-deception?
Well, Wikipedia has a pretty good definition. It says, self-deception is a process of denying or rationalizing away the relevance, significance, or importance of opposing evidence and logical argument. Self-deception involves convincing oneself of a truth or lack of truth so that one does not reveal any self-knowledge or the deception.
So in layman terms, for simple guys like me, it's simply lying to yourself.
Exactly. So how common is self-deception among people anyway?
Okay, well, you know what? I read tons of articles and I've done the usual research, and across the board, the verdict seems to be everybody. At some point, everyone lies to themselves. It's just a question at what level and for how long. Mm-hmm. And that's generally a factor of what's motivating the self-deception.
Right.
And here's the thing, is if we look at ourselves from the point of believers, Adam and Eve in Genesis all the way to the Laodicean church in Revelation, so cover to cover, the Bible's just full of these illustrations of just how devastating it can be to, to practice self-deception in some way.
All right. Here's an excerpt from A.W. Tozer speaking on self-deception.
A.W. Tozer. Okay, just wanted to get that in.
Especially as it relates to people who strive to be right with God. Mm-hmm. Of all forms of deception, self-deception is the most deadly. And of all deceived persons, the self-deceived are the least likely to discover the fraud. When a man is deceived by another, he's deceived against his will, temporarily the victim of the other's guile. Since he expects his foe to take advantage of him, he's watchful and quick to suspect trickery. Under such circumstances, it's possible to be deceived sometimes and for a short while, but because the victim is resisting, he may break out of the trap and escape before too long. Mm-hmm. With the self-deceived, it's quite different. He is his own enemy and is working a fraud upon himself. He wants to believe the lie and is psychologically conditioned to do so. He doesn't resist the deceit but collaborates with it against himself. There's no struggle because the victim surrenders before the fight begins. He enjoys being deceived. The deeply religious man is far more vulnerable than the easygoing fellow who takes his religion lightly. The latter may be deceived, but he's not likely to be self-deceived. We have to ask, when we consider how damaging self-deception is, why do we tend to fall into it so easily?
Reform Scotland published an article on the sermon, The Most Dangerous Kinds of Self-Deception. And this sermon is actually a very old classic from a pastor who died very young, many, many years ago, but very gifted, ahead of his time, a fellow named Andrew Gray. And in this article, based on his sermon, they list a number of the hows and the whys that we get involved in self-deception. So well worth a look at.
Well, let me share some of the lists given here.
Okay.
And maybe you could shed a little light on
I will,
each
in
one
my
of them.
sage way.
Starting with how self-deception happens among professing Christians. And our first how is conscience rather than the law.
Okay, and here we are on, so this is how it happens. Mm-hmm. And I really love this one, conscience rather than the law, because he points out to this that, we want to have a clear conscience, but being at peace with your conscience isn't the be-all, end-all indicator that a person is actually right with God.
Well, a clear conscience is certainly a good thing, but the Old and New Testament talk about the believer's conscience.
Right, and we have this balance that we deal with there too, as well, don't we?
Yeah.
That on one hand we're told to have a clear conscience, on the other hand we're told to watch it, and in that balance, like Jeremiah, both Old and New Testament, Jeremiah 17:9 gives this warning: the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it? So we can see that, yeah, it's good to have a clear conscience, but that isn't really necessarily an indicator. Your conscience can be twisted. Right. You can be at peace with your conscience, and it's really just an illusion.
Right. And there have been some very evil people throughout history who slept quite peacefully at night.
Yeah, exactly. You think of a lot of them, even serial killers and everything, how they work. All you have to really do is rationalize whatever it is you're doing.
Right.
So we're not saying that having a clear conscience isn't important. It is important. It's just that if that's your sole way of judging how you are in your spiritual state, how you are with God, you're ripe for self-deception.
Yeah. And right. And according to Gray, here's another how: good intentions rather than good practice. This reminds me of Keith Green's song on, I wish we had time to actually play that.
The song, yeah.
But the sheep and the goats, if you have a chance to listen to it, you need to. Basically, Matthew 25 put to music.
Right, and it's masterful the way he goes through it. And he has his little ad-libs in there. And I love the line where Jesus says, and I was sick and you didn't visit me. He says, oh, Lord, you were sick. Oh, we would have sent you a card. You know, is it this intention, mixing up actually good intention with actual practice.
Right.
Not a good indicator. So.
Some Bible experts say that the entire book of James is on the issue of self-deception. A central part of that scripture says this, James 2:14 through 20. What good is it, my brothers, if someone says he has faith but doesn't have works? Can that faith save him? If a brother or sister is poorly clothed and lacking in daily food, and one of you says to them, go in peace, be warmed and filled, without giving them the things needed for the body, what good is that? So also faith by itself, if it doesn't have works, is dead. But someone will say, you have faith and I have works. Show me your faith apart from your works, and I'll show you my faith by my works. You believe that God is one, you do well. Even the demons believe and shudder. Do you want to be shown, you foolish person, that faith apart from works is useless?
Yeah, it's a pretty hard argument or a pretty hard explanation to argue with there. So.
Yeah. Okay, I'll skip down to Gray's last how, and that's outward blessings.
Okay, this is how we manage to get self-deceived. And this how is one for us to strike a real chord. It's said a number of ways, but it's interesting. In all the articles and the research that I look at, this one comes up in some variation everywhere as I'm reading this. And basically, it plays out like this. People are doing whatever they please. They're doing whatever it is. Even if they know that scripturally, well, you know what, technically this isn't something God approves of, but I'm doing it. The sky isn't falling. There isn't some immediate repercussion for doing this. So whether we do it consciously or subconsciously, there's this little voice that says, you know what, I'm getting away with this. So even though I know I'm doing wrong, I still must be okay with God.
I think of Eve and the apple.
Yeah, right.
and
tastes pretty good.
Yeah, and I didn't immediately die.
I didn't die right away.
Another angle of outward blessings is the parables of the man who built more barns and the rich man and Lazarus. They're warnings from Jesus that physical prosperity isn't a sign you're right with God.
Right, and in this slant of it, it's not so much waiting on punishment. It's the idea that because God has given me a whole lot of comfort and ease, and things are going well for me physically, then I must be okay spiritually. And this is a proven trap for self-deception. Now, here's the scary thing for us, is that the more material blessing in a culture or society, individual, then the more likely we are, the more widespread self-deception is likely to be in this way. We're okay because we're prosperous. Yeah, so another version of that.
Okay, well, now let's switch to the why. The article has a header, Why Are People Self-Deceived? Number one is they do not examine themselves.
Yeah, so we looked at the things that suck us in. Now we're saying what part we play in this.
Right.
And one part, like you said, we do not examine ourselves. Gray refers to Galatians 6:4, which says, let every man prove his work. And this is one of those things in the translation. In the original Greek word, that word they use for prove is usually used for when you're checking precious metals and stuff, and you're really examining to make sure you're looking at the real thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so, in the metaphorical sense, when you're talking about a person's works, Strong's defines it like this: the term would mean to recognize as genuine after examination, as to approve or deem worthy. So,
yeah. So it's not enough just to do the good thing.
Right.
We have to do some self-examination on what we're really trying to accomplish and why we're really doing it, and to allow God to show us ourselves through his eyes. Right.
And the whole point of that is once again in the balance. We don't want to paralyze ourselves by this a toxic level of self-examination.
Mm-hmm.
But if we don't take a hard look and prove in the way of this is genuine, this is real gold, this is really what I'm doing for the right motivation, everything. If we don't do that stuff, we're open to self-deception.
Yeah. Okay, another of the whys on Gray's list is they do not exercise faith.
Yeah, and he refers to Romans 3:27, and really it fits in well with what you were reading out of James, or you either read it or you're about to read it. It's not that I'm clairvoyant. We've gone through the transcript, right?
Yeah, right.
But the idea he talks where, and Romans can be a bit difficult to understand sometimes, but Paul talks about the law of works, and of course that's the whole you earning your righteousness versus the law of faith. Now, it's not that the law of faith is passive. It's really quite the opposite, because if you really believe something, you will act on it. So faith isn't really faith until you act on the faith. So you do have action. If you don't act on the faith, it's an abstract thing, and abstract can very easily come ivory tower, fantasy type thing.
Right.
And if that's where you are, then you can almost count on it. You'll fall into some level of self-deception.
They are ignorant of their corrupt nature.
Right. Now, the church in Laodicea is a prime example of this, as Mitch,
Right.
yeah.
In the letter to the churches, God says this to the church in Laodicea, Revelation 3:17. For you say, I'm rich, I have prospered, and I need nothing, not realizing that you are wretched, pitiable, poor, blind, and naked.
Right, and understanding that it fits in with the other stuff. Laodicea was a rich place and a professional place.
Right.
They had a lot of prosperity going on there, and they were thinking so they were all righteous. And God's pointing out, no, you're missing it. If we ever forget that we still have a fallen nature, if you follow a theology that says, or a faith system that says, all your evil is removed, you're in for a bad time.
Yep.
Because it's not true. We have to remember, not only do we remember, we stand on guard against the fallen tendencies that are always there. And if we ever let our guard down, well, self-deception's just around the corner.
Yeah. Okay, our final why believers are self-deceived is they compare themselves with those who are worse. Oh.
Yep. And I mean, it's
Never done that.
No, never do it at all. And of course, this is an old one as far as even for Scripture. Remember Jesus talking about the tax collector and the Pharisee.
Right. It's Luke 18:9-14. 2 men went up into the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee, standing by himself, prayed thus, God, I thank you that I'm not like other men, extortioners, unjust, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week. I give tithes of all that I get. But the tax collector, standing far off, wouldn't even lift his eyes to heaven, but beat his breast, saying, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. I tell you, this man went down to his house justified rather than the other. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, but the one who humbles himself will be exalted.
Okay, and so this is classic self-deception, right? And I guess in a modern sense, what I think of is some of those shock reality TV shows.
Yep.
And I know I mentioned it, people probably come up with 5 names right off the cuff.
Yeah.
But when you look, all of them were based on the same little tendency, is that people love to feel good by going, well, at least I'm not as bad as that guy.
Right. That why ties in with an item on Gray's how list, a tendency to judge ourselves on the extraordinary rather than ordinary experience.
Right, and this is pretty common. It's you talk about a modern day illustration. Remember the Seinfeld? Remember the comedy show Seinfeld?
Yeah.
Anybody ours? Well, yeah, we remember. I don't know. We might
Half
have
of our sayings that we
come up from that. Well, and one in particular from a series that dealt with a character named Babu.
Babu. Yeah, I believe Jerry encourages Babu to follow his dream to open a restaurant or something.
Yeah, that's right.
I believe it's specialized in Middle Eastern food.
Yeah, some kind of food like that. And so then Jerry, now feeling good about himself anyway, decides to be even more supportive by going down and being one of the first customers at Babu's new restaurant. And Jerry's so pleased with how he's being supportive in this way. And of course, in the beginning of this whole little story, then Babu confirms it for Jerry by going, Jerry, you're a very, very good man. You're a very good man.
You do.
I practiced. I got Babu's poster up there on the wall too. And Jerry responds in a classic way, and it's one of those lines that's just great because it's just kind of nodding to himself and going, yes, I am. I am a good person.
Then as the story goes on, poor Babu ends up getting deported because of something that Jerry does down the line.
Right.
And now he's a very, very bad man.
Yeah, but there you go. You got it too. But it was in an entertaining way. It showed this. We have this tendency to look at ourselves in this way. Everyone does something kind or good at some point in their life.
Right. We all have our moments.
We all have our moments. But the tendency is we tend to appraise ourselves on those few high points rather than on the daily common points. So here we are judging what kind of a person we are by the 10% or even 2% of our high spots, not the 98% of how we usually lead our lives.
It's very human to use selective filters when we look at ourselves.
Yep.
In an article by Tom Askell entitled, Am I Deceiving Myself? How to Know? He comes to this conclusion. We'll make it our conclusion for this wordcast. The mere possibility of falling into this kind of deadly trap ought to be enough to breed extreme humility in the most experienced believer and most accomplished church. It ought to call us to a radical commitment to measuring our lives by what Scripture calls us to be and do, and by nothing else. It ought to make us willing to listen to criticism, even criticism from those who openly oppose. Our prayer should be that of David in Psalms 139, 23 through 24. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my anxieties, and see if there's any wicked in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. And finally, the ever-present danger of self-deception should keep us running to Jesus Christ as the great shepherd of our souls. We desperately need him to secure our standing and our walk.
Right, and that's a great conclusion. That's enough said. If I can fall on Forrest Gump, I'll just say, and that's all I have to say about that. But that's our conclusion in there. Well, major turn here. We are professing fans of the group We the Kingdom, and they have a song called Peace. And that was what we're featuring this week from not from them, but from the Canaan Praise team. And we're featuring, even though we've done this one before, it's because we love it so much.
Before we go, we also want to share a podcast feature, Sunday Follow-Up. Word for the Week is usually the first layer of information on our weekly focus. It's usually followed up in the Sunday sermon, so we plan to drop those follow-ups between podcast episodes.
Right. Now, the sermons on the video side in Facebook and YouTube, they're coming up in the services anyway, so we have no problem there. We just wanted to give that extra information to the podcast listeners.
Right. So may you see yourself through God's eyes and continue to grow. And until next week, be blessed. See ya.
When my mind is like a battlefield and my heart is overcome by fear, and hope seems like a ship that's lost at sea, my enemies on every side, and I'm tempted to run and hide. A gentle whisper reaches out to me. Fiery arrows whistling, the terror of the night sets in, but I can feel your angels all around. I'm resting underneath the shelter of your mighty wings. Your promises are where my hope is found. Peace holds me when I'm broken, sweet peace that passes understanding. When the whole wide world is crashing down, I fall to my knees and breathe in your peace. You're the God who's never found, so I will not be afraid. God, you always keep me safe in your arms. I remember who you are. You're the God who's never far away, so I will not be afraid. God, you always keep me safe, and you give me peace that holds me when I'm broken. You can watch Word for the Week at canancommunity.org. You can also catch our live stream on Canaan Community's Facebook, YouTube, or your favorite podcast app.